Hi, students. Welcome to video 11. It is on the age structure diagrams and the demographic transition model. So when you're done with the video, you should be able to discuss characteristics of a country based on its age structure diagram. You should also be able to explain the steps of the demographic transition model. So here are our age structure pyramids. The red is representing people in the pre-reproductive age group, so 0 to 14. The yellow is people in the reproductive ages, 15 to 44, and the blue is our post-reproductive age group. So you should kind of draw a very basic diagram of each of the shapes and then kind of write some characteristics about each one of them. So expanding rapidly is a country that has lots and lots of young people and then a good amount of adults. Typically, they're going to have less old people because usually these are places that are not having as good sanitation medical conditions, so the elderly don't live quite as long. So you see this, I call this an extended pyramid shape. When you move up a little bit, so not so developing, into more developed societies like the United States and Australia, you'll notice that the pyramid is not so extended at the bottom. So now you still have, in this situation, a lot of young people. It will be still expanding, but it's going to be expanding slowly now instead of really, really fast. You also notice that the older people at the top tend to have a larger proportion of the society because people are living longer in that country. A stable pyramid shows people that are a country that is not growing at all. So it has basically leveled off and it's not going to be growing anymore, like Italy or Greece. I call this a bullet. Is going to be a country that's actually declining. So it has gotten to the point where there's fewer people being born, and they're not replacing the adults that are having those children. So places like Germany, Japan, Russia, their populations are actually declining. So here we can track the baby boomers in the United States. So these are people that were born in late 40s, early 50s. My father is an example of a baby boomer. He's currently 70. So this is where we are now. We've seen this bulge because there were so many babies that were born in those years, and eventually, in 15 years or so, they're going to be really old, really elderly, and we're going to be having to take care of more elderly people than we normally are. So you're still going to have the same amount of young people, but you're going to have more elderly people, which can put a strain on your economy. One of the reasons why Social Security has continued to increase in the age at which you could actually get Social Security services. So when we look at population age structures, we've talked about this a little bit in the past. 17% of people in developed countries are under the age of 15 versus 32% in developing countries. So this just shows you again the growth that we're going to see throughout the world. Those 4 billion people are going to be coming from developing nations, and we've seen most of them are going to be in African countries. So we can actually end up going backwards. We can have an age structure that was expanding really rapidly, and then it basically starts to collapse, and we have some really weird structures here. So this is Botswana. This is what it looked like before the AIDS epidemic, and then this is what it looks like now after. So we have this really strange shape where lots of children are dying. Adults are living, relatively longer than or more than the children, and then the elderly population is really dropping off and almost non-existent. So our population can actually go backwards in terms of developing our nation if we have something like the AIDS epidemic that happens. So we're going to look at the demographic transition model. You may want to pause the video to kind of jot down some of these words, but if you want to wait until we actually look at the model and you go back to this, that might be more helpful. So as countries develop, they go through kind of a series of pretty predictable population trends. So that's kind of what we're going to look at in this next graph. Okay, so here's the demographic transition model. If you could find this online, or if you want to print this off, it is on my website under the PowerPoint slides. You really should have this in your notes. So pretty much stage one, pre-industrial stage, before in the Industrial Revolution, this is what was happening in most countries. So you'll notice that the birth rate is really high. That's the red line. But the death rate is also really high because you don't have sanitation, you don't have medical advancements, you don't have even soap and water. So your total population in your first stage is relatively low. So it's very low because you have a high birth rate, but you also have a high death rate. Now, I know if you took AP Hugs, you were told that there are no countries in stage one, but our book is a little bit different. Our book says that countries like Ethiopia and sub-Saharan Africa that are dealing with the AIDS epidemic actually are in stage one still. They were in stage two and then they went back to stage one. So that's just a slight difference in the curriculum. So stage two, you still have a really high birth rate for most of the stage, but now your death rate has started to decline. So you see really, really exponential growth here of our population in stage two. So this is when you actually start to have health care. So people are not dying as quickly, but the birth rate has not really shown caught up to that yet. Stage three, you start to level off. The birth rate is going down and is starting to almost meet the death rate, but your population is still growing a little bit. And then stage four, you're actually going to have zero population growth. So you're going to level off with your population growth because now the death rate and the birth rate are pretty much equal. So this would be in kind of like the really developed nations. And then you can also even go negative, and sometimes you see stage five described, and that's when your birth rate has decreased to the point where your population is also declining. And that's like Russia is a good example of that, and so is Japan. The United States, we say, is in stage three because we still have our total population is increasing. China is also in stage three. So what are some things that actually cause the death rate to go down? And this is how you get those numbers changing in the demographic transition. So you have an increased food supply, the population is better nourished. Mainly it's the advances in medicine and improved sanitation that's going to cause the death rate to go down. You also have safer water because you actually can have sewer systems and things like that. And then the U.S. infant mortality rate is still actually higher because we don't have adequate pre and postnatal care for people living in poverty. We also struggle with drug addiction in this country. So people are, very strongly addicted to opioids. And if you are addicted to opioids, you're more likely to have a child die when you are trying to give birth. We also have a pretty high teenage birth rate in this country for bunch of different reasons. And the younger people are, the more likely they're going to actually experience infant mortality. Okay, that's it. Bring your questions tomorrow.